Erik, I Google searched you and I came up with over 200 albums that you've mixed and engineered. And give me a little history of this. You have quite an amazing history of albums that you've worked on, projects.
I do the same thing too sometimes. I go and I look and I said, damn, I've done that much work. Because you just go from project to project year after year. And I've been working since 1970. I graduated from San Francisco State University with a broadcasting degree in 1975. So ever since then, I've never stopped working. I tried to make it in San Francisco when I graduated from school there, and it's really a small, tight, clique recording community in San Francisco. And I knocked on every door there, and I couldn't get a job, so I moved to LA and got a job instantly as an assistant, working for about $2 an hour for about 80-hour weeks. And I worked for Westlake Studios, and I eventually became their chief engineer and did projects there working for people that would come in. And after 2.5 years there, I left and just went off on an independent career. I think the first project I worked on when I left Westlake was a Gilberto Gil album. It was a Brazilian guitar player that I did with Humberto Gatica. He gave me my first engineering gig, my real engineering gig. And then I worked with Henry Casey and Sunshine Band. It's been a long time since I've seen him. I forgot. But and did a singer, Terry DeSario, and she had a gold single back then. And it's actually the only gold single that I have. I have one gold 45 single that I have up on the wall. And then I started working with Stanley Clarke, and I worked with him for about 3 years. And I was basically his boy for about 3 years and did every project that he did. And that was a great learning experience. I had actually worked with George Duke at Westlake Studios as an assistant. At the time, Tommy Vicari was his engineer. And I was an engineer for the studio, so I was assigned to a lot of different clients that would come in. And I was aware of George's music and did everything I could to get assigned to his session. And once I started working with him, we just clicked, and I worked with him as an assistant for a couple of years. George was one of the first people to put a home studio. Not the first. I mean, there were other people who did it before him, but he went all out and put a full professional studio in his home. He didn't start out that way. He just started out to do a listening room because he always worked in other studios. But he started to realize that this was the way to go, and this was 1981. And he needed someone to help him get that together. So had been working with him at Westlake, so it was just a natural progression to work with him there. And then I went off and worked with Stanley Clarke for a few years and engineered I think 2 or 3 of Stanley's albums, and Nancy Wilson and Ramsey Lewis album I did. And a couple other things I did with him, Maynard Ferguson album, a big band album. And then George saw that I actually was not just an assistant engineer, that I was actually able to engineer. So that's when he started hiring me, and George is a great guy. Music is always impeccable. He's what I call a secure producer. He knows what he wants, and he knows when he's got it. At his studio, he has a Euphonics console and a Euphonics R1 hard disk recorder, and also, of course, Pro Tools. Everybody has Pro Tools these days. And quite a few digital samplers and a lot of digital stuff. We were early embracees of digital technology. We were one of the first people that started using the Mitsubishi 32-track digital tape recorder and used it for many years. And now you can buy them, if you can sell them, you can buy them for about $600. They cost $150 when they were made.
It's $150,000.
That's correct, yes, $150,000. But they were great machines, worked great, sounded good. 16-bit. They were limited, so we've moved on. At George's studio, he basically has two stations. He has a mixing station and a writing station, and they're back to back like this. Here's the console here, which is where I am, and here's his computer gear and MIDI, all the MIDI stuff, keyboard controllers, a lot of flat screens everywhere. And this is where he composes, and this is where I record and mix. And then when he's done doing the pre-production stuff, he comes over on this side, and then we sit together and work on the console side. The typical way that he goes through a production is he meets with the artist, and they get the material together. And a lot of times he will do a mock-up, and he plays everything. He'll mock the whole song up, and then either have a whole band come in and replay it, or replay it in parts. And sometimes we just use what he's done. Depends. It's always different. And so it's a marriage of what he puts together MIDI-wise and what we record live, unless it's just a completely live thing, which we've done a lot of things that way as well. But usually, even with the live stuff, he mocks it up first, so he has a template of what he wants, and then we don't try to lock or replace anything. We just do it live with real musicians. George's situation is a little different from a lot of people. He doesn't use a lot of plugins. He uses what he needs, but his production is not plug-in based. And in fact, my engineering is not really plug-in based unless I'm working in the box. We use a lot of different plugins when we have to, but we don't use that much in his environment. When I'm working at home, I have a completely different setup at my studio at home. And I do mix a lot in the box, and I do use a lot of plugins. Depends, and it always depends on what I'm doing. And by the way, I might add that, and this is not just because I'm here doing this interview, years ago, I started using a lot of Waves plugins, and to this day, I still use a lot of Waves plugins for a variety of reasons. They're easier to use, and they sound great. And I love being able to drag stuff around, you know. Well, actually, what I'm doing right now at my studio is I have a computer I use for mixing, and I'm running another computer just to run one of your plugins, run the IR1. And that's all it's doing. I've got it. That computer's just running the reverb, and then nothing else. Oh, email and email and reverb. I'm not doing that much recording at my facility, although I can record, and I have recorded at my place, and I've recorded Norman Brown, and I've done percussion for Julio Iglesias, like a week of percussion with Rafael Padilla at my place, and they send us the tapes, I load them in, we lay a lot of tracks of percussion, and then we send them back to Miami, and then they do whatever they're going to do with them. So those are the kind of projects that I'm doing at my place with recording. The mixing stuff, some of the stuff I'm producing or co-producing, and that stuff I might record a little bit on. Generally, it's Pro Tools. I have done some mastering at my studio. I can master. I don't consider myself really to be a mastering engineer because I don't do it every day. And so I have high respect for guys that do that every day. They bring another perspective to mastering. But I have done mastering, and by the way, I know I'm going to sound like I'm pimping Waves here, but I always use Waves, the mastering suite, anything that I master out of my house. I've started doing some mastering, and I didn't really have any Gucci compression that I like to use. I have some Neves, and I have some GMLs, and I have some stuff, and they all work great, but I've never really wanted to use them for mastering, so I recently purchased his mastering limiter, and I think it sounds great. And it's all tubey analog stuff. I've gone back the other way. I'm going back to mastering to another machine, and then coming back analog and mastering that way, instead of keeping it all digital. I like coming out and printing at a higher sampling frequency, at least 96. I kind of mix analog and digital. I used to work all in the box. And I had an experience last year when I was working on a John Powell film where I was mixing, you're going to love this. I mixed Geely. Okay, so in a way, I'm connected to which has become a sort of a cult film, which I actually love that. It's kind of cool. The music was great, you know, but there was a moment there when I only had so many inputs on my console, and so when we're working, we generally one output, one instrument, one output, or stereo, two outputs, and they come up on separate faders on the console. We mix analog and then go back to another machine. Sometimes I have to combine things, and depending on the cue that I'm working on, I separate them differently, what's coming to the console. I had a cue where there were a couple of real high-frequency dulcimers that were just real spanky and sparkly, high-endy things. And I mixed them together at the same two outputs, so I only had two faders. And then I found two more faders on the console, something I opened up. So I said, you know, split those two instruments out that were going down two outputs in Pro Tools and bring them out four outputs on the console. And when they did that, I said, let me hear that again. And then went back to the two outputs coming out of Pro Tools, and then I listened to it again. The only thing that was different, and the levels were pretty much matched. I mean, I didn't set tones to make sure they're exactly, but they're, you know, it didn't even matter. I mean, it was such a dramatic difference that the whole high end of those two signals combining together, that experience made me a believer of analog summing. Up to that point, I had said, and it's actually been in print, me saying that I didn't think it mattered that much. You know, and part of that was because I was working at home and I really didn't have any other way to do it. So, you know, I would mix and it would sound pretty good to me. But when I actually had a situation where I could really hear it, and on something that showed it off like high-frequency dulcimers with a lot of really tinkly overtones, it was dramatic. So I've started incorporating that at home, and I now have a summing mixer at home, and so I'm starting to do some summing. It's a little bit, it's become a hybrid where I do a lot of stuff in the box and then sum it analog. And then I have all this Gucci analog gear, a lot of tube stuff that I wasn't using. And it seemed, you know, I've got all this really nice gear that I used to record. Why not use it when I'm mixing? So I have been. That's where I'm at today. That's what I'm doing right now. And that's what I just finished an album where I submixed out nice, you know, English tube EQ, some tube limiters, compression, a lot of real nice stuff in the analog world. And what I also do in some digital stuff too, so it's a combination. Comment I used to get was, how do you get your digital stuff to not sound so harsh? A long time ago when digital first started, that was one of the major complaints, was that digital sounded harsh and grainy. And I don't know that I could actually answer that, except that just all the little steps that I would take to try and ensure that it wouldn't sound harsh in the end. And so I've been always aware of that analog thing, but working digital at the same time. I know it sounds like they contradict each other, but they don't in the end. I don't want the end result to sound digital, to have that digital crunchy sound that I hate that. So I want it to be smooth, yet bright, big. Bruce Swedien, you know who that is? He said something once that I never forgot as an engineer. He said, fill the speaker, fill the meter. I actually said it the other way around. He said, fill the meter and fill the speaker. And it was an excellent, you know, it's one of the things that stayed with me. You know, there aren't a lot of rules. There are some rules, but then there are rules that you can break. And basically, as long as you like it, it's cool. It's when it comes to audio. But I think the rules that do exist is like what Bruce Swedien said. Fill the speaker, very important. You got a wide range in your speaker. Make sure you're putting all the frequencies in there, whatever you do, no matter what you do. Maybe not each instrument, but when you're done with your mix, make sure your mix has all the frequencies, way down, way high. And when you go into mastering, you can always adjust it a little bit if it's a little bit off in one way or another. I believe that the next phase of our digital world is going to be DSD. I think that at some point we're going to move from PCM digital recording to direct stream digital, which is a different format and sounds way better. Sounds more analog-y, if you will. So I don't know when that's going to happen. There's one company now that's doing, two companies, Gen X and Sony Sonoma, that are making products, multi-track products. But there's an issue with handling the data in that world. So, and the other issue is that it's not standard, and the whole world we've gone into PCM recording at 44, 48, 96. We're starting to slowly come up to 96. Which, by the way, in my opinion, sounds much better. I do end up going to other people's homes to work on their projects a little bit, but if they want me to work on it, generally it comes to my home. And I think that's what's what happened. Everybody has their own little thing, their own little home studios now, and you want a bass overdub, you send a CD or an MP3 or whatever over the internet to somebody, they load it in there, play a bass, send it back to you, or you go over and pick up a CD or a hard drive, and people are bringing hard drives everywhere. You know, let's load my file, do a quick overdub, and then leave. Instead of having a studio where you do your project, it's turning into a lot of little studios, and thankfully we're still going to large studios. I love being in the big studios. When I work at a scoring stage like Fox or Sony, you have the mixer, which would be me. Then you have a tape op, and you have a guy that patches everything in. So that's 3 guys. You usually have somebody in the back that's editing. That's 4 guys. You have somebody that sets up the room. That's 5 guys or girls, whatever. And you have somebody that just runs the headphones. That's 6 people. That's 6 people on a scoring stage. Now, granted, you have 100 people in the room playing at the same time. You better have 6 people there making sure that nothing is missed. But what I find happening in this home studios is I'm all of those 6 guys. Oh, I left the maintenance guy out. There's 7 guys, you know. So I'm all of those guys. When something breaks, I gotta fix it, because you call tech support and 3 days later you get an email back. Engineers' fees have gone up dramatically over the years. When I started in when did I start? Like 78 was when I really started, engineering. I mean, I was happy to get $15 an hour. And you work for a film, you can make as much as $200 an hour. That's not the book rate. The book rate for a mixer on a film is somewhere in the nature of $50 to $60. And you have all your overtime and all this other stuff that gets built in. So is it negotiable? Yes, it's still negotiable. What's happening in the home areas is people are saying, well, I can only pay you this much, but you're working at your home. You have no cost. It's just you already have all the gear. It's in your home. And you don't have to go anywhere. Can't you do it for less? And so you think, well, yeah, I don't have to drive somewhere. It is convenient. And I don't have a session next week. Okay, I'll do it. It'll fill my book for next week, and I'll do it. And so you do it for less, and then everybody's happy.
What would be your chain of choice? Microphone, mic pre?
I cannot say that there's any chain that I would use for everything. I have a number of different chains that I use depending on what I'm doing. Yesterday I was doing a vocal with a female singer, and after years and years of doing this kind of stuff, I was shocked when I had to plug in an equalizer, because lately I don't record vocals with EQ. I just record them flat. I figure I'm going to EQ them later. It's just easier, plug and go. But I was missing some frequencies out of her voice, and I ended up adding 2 kilohertz and rolling off bottom, which for a female vocalist is something I never do. I never do that. I said, but you got to use your ears, and if it sounds like it needs it, you got to trust your ears and do what your ears are telling you. One of the things I've learned as an engineer, you have to be kind of a chameleon. If you want to work with a lot of different people, you have to have the ability to figure out the person you're working with and figure out what it is they want or their vision and help them reach their vision. That's my opinion of what an engineer should be. Some engineers would disagree with that, and they would say, well, good sound is good sound. It doesn't matter what the project is. But I think that there's a lot of different good sounds. And so you need to find out what good sound means for the person you're working with, artist, producer, even record company. They're the ones that are ultimately paying your salary. And do that and keep yourself happy at the same time, which is what I try to do. I've often said that if I couldn't do what I'm doing, then I would probably be a forest ranger and live up in one of those tree houses, and do a fire watch, It would be completely different from all the technology. And I do like to garden sometimes when I'm not working. I'll go out and I'll stick my hands in the dirt because it's so completely different from what I do with, plugging in wires and moving electrons around. I love what I do. I'm very fortunate that I get to do what I love to do. Is it hard? Is it a pain in the butt sometimes? Sometimes do I wish I was not there? Of course. When I've got to punch in the vocal line for the 50th time, it's not fun anymore. But fortunately, that's not the norm. That's the abnorm. So I like the feeling I get when I'm working. I feel good. I enjoy my work. When I'm mixing, it's all about feeling for me. I mix loudly a lot of times because I have to get an emotional feeling from the music that I'm working on. I have to feel that the instruments are correct. I almost can't mentalize it in that when it's right, I feel it's right. When it's wrong, it's almost like the hair on my neck goes up. So it's very much a feel thing, and so I feel good when it's right. I feel good when it's not right. I don't feel good. It's a meter for me. It's my emotional music meter.